Pastor Ed here with a special weekly devotion. Today is Wednesday, January the 7th, so this should go out and be available tomorrow on the 8th. As you may or may not know, I ended up in the hospital again this past weekend, and which meant that the sermon, all the work I had done for Sunday, kind of went by the wayside. So my thought was to share the reading again from Sunday and my sermon that I would have preached on Sunday morning, to at least give you an opportunity to hear what I was thinking about, and also to have an outlet for the work that I had done in preparation. Think of this in terms of actually yesterday or 2 days ago from when you get a chance to see this, January 6th, which is Epiphany. And that is the occasion that we remember and celebrate when the three magi came and visited the infant Jesus. Now, quick note, you may know this already, but we often, especially in our nativity scenes, have the whole, the manger setting and the animals and Mary and Joseph and the baby and angels and shepherds and the three wise men, as if they came shortly after shepherds, which is not at all what happened. The story in Matthew, it's not in Luke. Luke has the story of the birth and the arrival of the shepherds. In Matthew, the birth is sort of a foregone conclusion, but then the Magi arrive. They come to a house. And so immediately you get the sense that this is sometime after the birth of Jesus. And in fact, we know from the story and what Herod ends up doing, as you'll hear in just a moment, with the slaughter of the holy innocents, that he had all the children 2 years old or younger, basically to cover his bases, that Jesus was probably born sometime within that time frame, which means that the Magi didn't come for weeks, months, as much as a year or two after Jesus's birth. And so we often think of it all together at the same time, which is not true. So Epiphany is a whole separate event, and it takes place again weeks, months, a year or more after the birth of Jesus. It's recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. And so I'm going to read Matthew 2, 1 through 23, which was the reading in church in case you were there. And then I'm going to offer you as my quote unquote weekly devotion the sermon I had prepared for Sunday. So here is Matthew 2, verses 1 through 23. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage." And when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." And when they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen in the east, till it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, again, not a barn, the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night and went to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. And then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." And then Joseph got up and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. And there he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The gospel of the Lord. Well, we're all acquainted with the phrase, there's good news and bad news, right? It typically describes a situation or a scenario that has both positive and negative aspects attached to it, often humorously so. So, for example, Lewis and Clark were on their historic expedition to cross the newly acquired western portion of the Louisiana Purchase. And at one point, Lewis made an announcement, "Man, I have some good news and some bad news." First, the good news. We've covered more miles today than any other day on our entire trip, 50 miles. Now the bad news. We're lost. Here's one involving a lawyer and the man he was defending. "I have good news and bad news," an attorney once told his client. "First, the bad news. The blood test came back and your DNA is an exact match with what was found at the crime scene." "Oh no," cried the client. "What's the good news?" "Your cholesterol is down to 140. Or here's one of my more favorite examples. Two buddies, Bob and Earl, were among the biggest baseball fans in America. For their entire adult lives, Bob and Earl discussed baseball history all throughout the winter and then pored daily over every box score during the season. Together, they went to upwards of 60 games a year, especially those of their beloved New York Yankees. They even agreed that whoever died first would try to come back and tell the other one if there was baseball in heaven. Well, sadly, one summer night, Bob passed away in his sleep after watching the Yankees' victory earlier that evening. He died happy, of course. A few nights later, his buddy Earl awoke to the sound of Bob's voice from the beyond. "Bob, is that you?" Earl asked. "Of course it's me," Bob replied. "This is unbelievable," Earl exclaimed. "So tell me, is there baseball in heaven?" "Well, I have some good news and some bad news for you. Which do you want to hear first?" "Well, tell me the good news first." "Well, the good news is that yes, there's baseball in heaven, Earl." "Oh, that's wonderful. So what could possibly be the bad news?" "You're pitching tomorrow night." And then there's those that deal with health and medical issues. Gallery owner tells one of his artists that he's got some good news and some bad news. The artist asks for the good news first. "Well," he replies, "the good news is that a man came in here today asking if the price of your paintings would go up after you died. And when I told him that they would, he went ahead and bought every single one of them." Elated, the artist asks, "Well, what could the bad news possibly be?" Evidently, that man was your doctor. Or this one, a woman walks into a doctor's office for her scheduled appointment, sits down in the waiting room. When it's her turn to see the doctor, she goes in and describes in detail all of her symptoms. The doctor is amazed because they're unlike anything he's ever heard before. And so the doctor goes ahead, he runs a few tests and then steps out of the room. Comes back a little later and he says, "Well, I have good news and bad news." The woman says, I'd like to hear the good news first, please." And the doctor replies, "The good news is we're naming a disease after you." And here's a couple that contain more than a kernel of truth in them. The good news about computers is that they do what you tell them to do. The bad news is that they do what you tell them to do. And then there's this one. Donald Trump called a press conference to discuss his recent meeting with Vladimir Putin and announces, "The good news is that Mr. Putin told me that he wants peace." After everyone cheered and clapped in relief, he then added the bad news: a piece of Crimea, piece of Ukraine, piece of Finland. Finally, ending on a classic. Frog goes to a fortune teller to find out if he'll ever be lucky in love. The fortune teller reads his palm and she tells the frog, "I have good news and I have bad news. Which would you like to hear first?" And the frog naturally asks for the good news first. So the fortune teller says, "You're going to meet the most beautiful girl who's going to be very interested in you, will want to know all about you. She'll want you to open up for her and give you her heart. And give her your heart." "That's great," says the frog. "But what's the bad news?" "Well, unfortunately, you're going to meet her in biology class." Anyway, you get the picture. But while these were all rather humorous, not to mention fictional examples, when you stop and think about it, life itself is actually filled with moments that contain elements of both good news and bad news. For For example, I remember hearing that a high school classmate of mine woke up really sick one morning and was forced to cancel a job interview later that morning for a position he was really interested in. Obviously, that was the bad news. The good news? Well, that interview was scheduled for September the 11th, 2001. In other words, 9/11. And what made it really good news is that it was scheduled to be in one of the Twin Towers, no less. So good news, bad news situations are not always jokes or humorous fictions, but they can actually describe real life situations. Which leads us to our gospel reading from Matthew 2. And it's a little bit longer than gospel readings that we typically have in church, but that's because I didn't want to just read the first 12 verses, which only describe the visit of the Magi, but I also wanted us to hear the next 11 verses as well, which go on to describe the aftermath of their visit. In particular, a tragic incident that became known and remembered thereafter as the massacre or slaughter of the holy innocents. That is the execution of all the male children 2 years old and under in the vicinity of Bethlehem by a paranoid Herod after learning about the birth of Jesus, who represented in Herod's mind a potential rival. Little did he know. And also an event that, having been warned about it in a dream, convinced Joseph to take Mary and the baby and flee to Egypt in order to escape the evil that was about to take place. In fact, today's gospel reading is a classic good news, bad news scenario. But we can go back and start even earlier with Luke 2 and the account of Jesus' actual birth. In other words, there in Luke 2, we have the good news that Jesus was born. Bad news is that he was born in a stable because there was nowhere else for Mary and Joseph to stay at the time. The good news is that Jesus was the future savior of the world. Bad news is that he was born in a small backwater village called Bethlehem, where clearly no one was expecting him nor paying any attention whatsoever to his arrival. The good news, though, was that an army of angels actually proclaimed his birth. But the bad news was that the only ones to hear and witness it were a ragtag band of mangy shepherds keeping watch over their flocks, and who were not the most trustworthy or reputable people to have been given such wonderful news. But it doesn't end there. Of course, the good news, bad news pattern continues months later in today's gospel reading as well. The good news is that the Persian astrologers from the east who were fascinated by the possibility of just such a holy birth traveled far in coming to look for him. The bad news is that the trail briefly got cold, requiring that they stop in Jerusalem to ask, "Where is the child who's been born King of the Jews? For we've observed his star in the east, have come to pay him homage." Good news is that their search led them to Herod, who quickly summoned all the chief priests and elders to ask them where they thought the Messiah was to be born. Bad news, after they had told him that according to the prophets it was to be in Bethlehem, is that now Herod knew as well. Good news, however, is that Herod called for the Magi before they went looking and asked them to send him word when they had found the child in order that excuse me, he too might go and pay him homage as well. The bad news is that what Herod really wanted to do was to eliminate this potential rival. Good news, of course, is that the Magi were successful in finding Jesus and were able to pay him homage and offer the gifts that they had brought with them, gold and frankincense and myrrh. The bad news is that after they had been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, but to leave for their own country by another road, Herod quickly realized that he had been tricked and was infuriated. Good news, however, is that, as mentioned earlier, is that Joseph was warned in a dream, just like the Magi, and sought safety with Mary and Jesus in Egypt. The bad news is that Herod then decided, in order to be sure that he had eliminated Jesus, to give the command to kill all the male children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or younger. This was based on the information, again, that he had gleaned earlier from the Magi about the time frame in which the child had probably been born. Good news is that later, when Herod finally died, an angel once again appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him that it was now safe to return to the land of Israel because the one who was seeking the child's death was now dead. The bad news, however, is that Archelaus, the son of Herod, was now ruling Judea in his place, and he was as bad or even worse than his father. Good news, though, is that when he heard this, Joseph was obviously afraid to go there. And there was more good news in that in yet another dream, he was sent to the district of Galilee instead, where he now made his home together with Mary and the child in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. And it's on that positive note that our gospel reading ends. Good news without any corresponding bad news. at least so far, at least for the moment. But as we know, there was plenty of bad news yet to come, in particular once Jesus began his public ministry. Temptations to be overcome, enemies constantly trying to trick and trip him up, opposition from the religious leaders who feared that his growing popularity and well-received teachings would somehow rob them of their power and influence, and a Roman Empire that always did everything in its power to subjugate the peoples and countries that they had conquered and ruled over, and then always squashed even the hint of revolt or rebellion as well, which, unfortunately, the Jewish leaders then used to their advantage to have Jesus executed, put to death on a cross. However, there was much good news to come as well. Much good news, wonderful news, the very best news about a Savior who, though he died, rose again so that all might have new life. So much good news, in fact, that ultimately far outweighed all the bad news which had preceded it. Good news, in fact, that still inspires and encourages and gives us hope even to this day. Amen. Well, I hope to be feeling better. I hope to be in church on Sunday. I hope your week is better and especially healthier than mine has been. And looking forward to seeing you then. Till then, take care. Bye.